Let me try to show my gratitude by not spoiling that in the last session. So, Kripke on the Follies of Functionalism. Mexico, I'm told, took the initiative in the middle of the last century in founding an international association of academies to provide a highest authority for the Spanish language. So you would not be dependent on the Royal Academy in Madrid or anything like that. Nothing like this has happened in the English-speaking world. And Saul and I and our compatriots are still linguistically dependent on the former colonial power. That is, the highest linguistic authority for us is a very British one. It's the Oxford English Dictionary. And it will be useful, before turning to Saul's views on functionalism and philosophy of mind, to turn to that authority, the OED, and see how it defines the word function. And the definition, which I've scribbled on the board, turns out to take the form of a disjunction, revealing a crucial ambiguity in the word. For function is defined as an activity or purpose, natural to or intended for a person or thing. Plainly, there are two senses here, the non-teleological activity and the teleological purpose. The difference comes out if we ask whether, as was asserted by one of our earlier speakers today, the function of the heart is to circulate blood around the body. This certainly is the intended purpose of Dr. Jarvik's artificial heart, a human invention designed by its creator precisely to circulate blood around the body. But what if the heart were born with? Well, if one takes the traditional view that the human body was designed by a god, then one may not be able to know, but one may at least guess that is perhaps not the creator's whole purpose, but at least among several intended purposes for the heart to circulate blood around the body. But what if the heart is merely the product of evolution by natural selection? Then, obfuscatory metaphors aside, there's no agent, no design, no intention, no purpose. It's merely that animals that have some efficient means of circulating fluid around their bodies tend to survive and reproduce better than those that do not. Aristotelian scholastic teleology, banished from physics in the 17th century, seems with Darwin to be belatedly banished from biology as well, 200 years or so later. Darwinians can say that moving the blood around the body is what the heart does do, but not that this is what the heart is for doing. Now, what does this have to do with our subject? Anyone who's read elementary expositions of functionalism and philosophy of mind will surely have noticed how most expositors, though supposedly they are discussing natural activities of the human mind or brain, almost immediately begin with comparisons and analogies to artifacts designed by human agents with intended purposes for them, most often computers, but sometimes pumps or something else. Such a step from function in the sense of natural activity to function in the sense of intended purpose threatens a serious fallacy of equivocation. Saul's remarks on functionalism, in a sense, are one long commentary on the observation that there is an equivocation here, as my present talk will be one long commentary on Saul's remarks to this effect. Well, Saul's thoughts on functionalism have so far been generally available only in the form of one long footnote, about a page and a half of fine print, in his 1982 book, Wittgenstein on Rules in Private Language. That's note 24, pages 35 through 37. Now, controversial questions of Wittgenstein exegesis are the last thing I want to get involved in here or anywhere. But fortunately, the reason the material on functionalism is relegated to a footnote in the Wittgenstein book is that it is recognized to be rather tangential to the general theme of that work and therewith to exegetical controversies. The key footnote does begin by citing the work of Wittgenstein, but the work cited is not the text under discussion in the bulk of the book, the Philosophical Investigations. Rather, it is the remarks on the foundations of mathematics, and specifically certain passages on ideal versus real machines. About halfway through the long footnote, the word functionalism first appears. It first appears in what traditional rhetoric calls an apophasis. An apophasis is a rhetorical device consisting of mentioning something by saying that one is not going to mention it. Saul suggested is that though he is not going to discuss functionalism, what he has just been saying about machines up to that point applies mutatis mutandis to functionalism. The note ends with an expression of hope to elaborate elsewhere. While elaborations did occur within a couple of years in public lectures in the spring and summer of 1984 at Duke University and then at a Wittgenstein conference in Kirchberg am Wechsel, Austria, An audio tape transcript of the latter lecture is being edited for publication, and I will be using it as my main source. The Austrian lecture is an easier source to use than the book, since, as Saul emphasizes in the lecture, unlike the Wittgenstein book, he is speaking for himself, expounding views he himself endorses. A few brief references to Wittgenstein are inevitable given the venue of the talk, but they do not take us far into many contentious issues. An account of Saul's views based on the same lecture material has already been published by Jeff Buchner. In addition to Saul's views, Buchner briefly discusses one published response to them, which is, so far as I know, the only such response as has been to date. Buchner argues that it misses the point, and since I entirely agree, I will make no further mention of it here. That itself is sort of an apophysis. Okay. Saul offers no precise characterization of what he understands functionalism to be. He describes it as the dominant position in philosophy of mind in his own country at the time of his talk. But it is precisely when a creed becomes dominant that it is most likely to experience fission into sects that need to be distinguished. Saul's omission of anything much in the way of characterizing functionalism and distinguishing varieties may be disappointing, but it is not surprising, given his complaint, an entirely justified complaint in my opinion, that professed functionalists themselves, apart anyhow from David Lewis, have been unclear about many important aspects of their various versions of the doctrine. Well, be all that as it may, it is now customary for accounts of functionalism, for instance, Janet Levin's entry in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, to distinguish three main varieties: machine state functionalism and two forms of causal role functionalism, a posteriori psychofunctionalism and a priori analytic function. And for the real cognoscenti, by this last I mean it in its role functionalist rather than its realizer functionalist version. Saul's remarks appear to be intended to apply quite broadly, presumably therefore to all three, but let me begin with the machine state view. This traces back to a 1967 paper by the late Hilary Putnam that, was Saul mentions in his lectures, by the 1980s, Putnam had abandoned the view. Indeed, he developed a barrage of arguments against it, and Buchner has written a whole book about these. He finds them all lacking in comparison to Saul's argument, and they are at any rate pretty clearly different from Saul's argument, and that may excuse my taking no note of them here. The idea behind machine state functionalism is quite simple. Consider a piece of software, a computer program, say for definiteness an algorithm for addition. To execute the program, one uses a piece of hardware, a physical computing machine, but the same program may be implemented on different kinds of machines, for instance, an old-fashioned mechanical adder or a newfangled electronic adder. The same step in the program, say carrying one at a certain point, will be executed in different ways on the different machines, say by turning a gear in the one case or by transmitting an electric impulse in the other. In consequence, there are two different ways in which, or levels at which, one may describe what the machine is doing at a given stage. The two may be called the functional way and the physical way. One may describe the machine functionally as carrying one, or one may describe it physically as doing something mechanical or electrical, turning a gear or transmitting an impulse, depending on the kind of device at work. An account in functional terms will be generally more perspicuous, though it is inevitably incomplete in comparison to a physical account, by leaving out details about how the machine does what it does. The most satisfying account may consist of a functional account together with information for each basic kind of step in the program as to how that kind of step is physically realized in the given machine. From such material as a play-by-play physical account of the whole computation presumably could be deduced if one were wanted. Clearly, a functional process carrying one cannot be identified with any particular physical process, such as gear turning or impulse transmitting. But still less is it a spiritual process taking place in some kind of ectoplasm or other mental substance. The idea behind machine state functionalism is that if one takes mental processes and states to be functional processes and states, like software processes and states, then one would avoid both physicalism or materialism and spiritualism or dualism in the philosophy of mind. That such avoidance is desirable seems to have been assumed by Putnam and others after little, if any, argument. But, at any rate, so we are led to the idea that became immensely popular, that of comparing the brain to the computer. Since the brain is hooked up on the one side to eyes and ears and so forth, and on the other side to muscles, we presumably should think of the computer involved as one that is hooked up on one side to cameras and microphones and so forth, and on the other side to motors. So we're thinking of a computer that is the central processing unit of a robot. About this idea, Saul makes three kinds of remarks, which I will take in what I consider order of increasing importance. So let's focus on one type of mental activity in which we sometimes engage, doing multiplication problems in our heads without pencil and paper. It is now incredible to me that when I was maybe 13 or 14 years old, I was a city champion in mental mathematics problems. Now I cannot do the simplest possible problem without writing it down on paper or chalk. This shows you that ripening with age isn't always an improvement. Here, in each instance, we're given a sensory input. Say, hearing the question, what is 13 times 14? And in each instance, we give a motor output, saying with moving the tongue to utter the answer 182. The mental process going on in between the publicly observable stimulus and response is what I want to focus on. According to machine state functionalism, this type of process should correspond to, or rather, it should be constituted by the execution of, a type of subroutine in some overall program being run on the brain. The difficulty for functionalism comes in trying to pin down what type of subroutine this should be. What could make a subprogram to be such that executing it would constitute the type of mental activity that we call multiplying? The first difficulty arises if we try to answer this question by saying, what makes this type of subprogram multiplying is just that when it is applied to two inputs, it gives their product. About this, Saul observes that a realistic comparison of our brains to computers would have to be a comparison to computers like so-called finite automata with a bounded storage capacity, rather than to ones like Turing machines with a potentially infinite capacity. But in that case, no subprogram is such that executing it will give the product in all cases. Saul's paper is entitled Lessons on Functionalism and Automata, and he devotes considerable space to beginning lessons in the theory of a finite automata, explaining how such automata can add and explaining why such automata cannot multiply. A second difficulty arises, even if we try to avoid this first difficulty, by taking as our model not finite automata, but Turing machines, which are able to multiply arbitrary inputs. About this reply, Saul emphasizes that we must take note of the distinction with which machine state functionalists begin between abstract software and concrete hardware for executing or implementing it. What is conventionally but misleadingly called a Turing machine, he remarks, should really be called a Turing program. It is not a piece of hardware or mechanical or electrical contraption or gadget, but something abstract that can be concretely executed or implemented by such hardware, and according to machine state functionalists, also by the so-called wetware of the brain. The difficulty here is that all physical realizations of a Turing machine are imperfect, and in the case of thinking of the brain as a physical realization of a Turing machine, it must be precisely because of the finite capacity of the brain as compared with the infinite capacity of the Turing machine. All such physical realizations occasionally malfunction temporarily, and they all eventually break down permanently. This means that whatever algorithm for multiplication may be included as a subroutine in the Turing program, implementation thereof is not going to give the product as output for every pair of numbers that may be given as input. Occasionally there will be a malfunction, an output given other than the genuine product, and eventually there'll be a breakdown and thereafter no more outputs at all. Now when I am doing what I call multiplying, what is it that makes what I am doing to be an implication of an algorithm for multiplication rather than for some other function? For there are, after all, many other computable functions that will give the same outputs as multiplication for all the inputs that I actually ever have encountered or ever will encounter during the course of my life. One could ask the same question about a mechanical or electrical contraption or gadget. What makes what it is doing, when it is doing what we call multiplying, to be an implication of an algorithm for multiplication rather than for some other function, since there are many other functions that will produce the results in all actual cases. A third difficulty arises if we try to answer this question by appealing to idealization, to counterfactuals about what would happen under ideal conditions, saying, well, the product of inputs is what I or the contraption or gadget would give as output if there were no malfunction or breakdown. About this response, Saul in effect observes, and this, in my opinion, is the single most crucial point in this whole discussion, that though the brain, or the mechanical or electronic device, is a physical object, the one-place predicate, X is malfunctioning, It does not express a physical property of such an object. That's not a physical predicate. For physical object X in question is malfunctioning if and only if it is not doing what it is supposed to do. Malfunctioning is thus a teleological notion, and hence it is not a physical notion, since teleology was excluded from physics at the time of the scientific revolution 400 years ago, when one ceased saying things like, heavy objects fall towards the center of the earth because they are trying to get to where they're supposed to be, their natural place, where it is right fitting and proper for them to reside. No, they aren't trying to do anything at all. They do not have purposes or goals or aims. That's out of physics. The notion of malfunctioning belongs with that notion and not with notions of scientific physics. Really what one has to do with here is a two-place predicate. X is malfunctioning if we consider it as an implication of Turing program Y. And really it's more complicated than that. It should be a three-place predicate, but let me stick with the two-place predicate. This two-place predicate, X is malfunctioning if considered as an implication of Turing program Y, by taking various specific Turing programs, T, T prime, and so forth, for Y, gives us a series of one-place predicates, different ones. X is malfunctioning if considered as an implementation of Turing program T. X is malfunctioning if considered as an implication of Turing program T prime, and so on. These arguably do express physical properties, but that is of no help until we answer the question of which program, T or T prime or whatever, is X to be considered an implementation. Here, T might be an abstract algorithm for multiplying, and T prime an abstract algorithm for multiplying, where these different operations agree on their outputs for all inputs X ever has encountered or ever will encounter, but differ elsewhere. You can't ask the machine what it is doing, multiplying or schmultiplying. You can ask me, and if you do, I will of course say that what I'm doing is what I call multiplying. But what makes it to be the case that when I say multiplying, I really mean multiplication and not schmultiplication? That is the form in which Saul confronts this kind of difficulty in the Wittgenstein book. We may fail to notice the fatal relativity here because ordinarily, when we're speaking about a computing machine, we are not speaking about some physical object that, as Saul puts it, fell from the sky, perhaps from a passing extraterrestrial spaceship. Rather, we are speaking of a contraption or gadget that was designed by human agents with definite intentions as to what algorithms they are supposed to be implementing. Design by an agent cannot be assumed for a brain, however. Obviously, the human brain was not designed by some human agent, not by some Dr. Jarvik or some Dr. Frankenstein, since such an agent needs to have a brain already in order to design anything with. As Saul notes, functionalists are generally not the sort of people who would want to assume the brain is the invention of some god. And anyhow, just as for Descartes, what matters is not whether there is a god, but whether there is a god who is not a deceiver. So for us, what matters is not whether the brain was devised by God, but whether it was devised by God who has made us privy to his intentions. Well, he hasn't made me privy to them, and I doubt many of the rest of you would find these be privy to them either, so there might as well not be such a God for purposes of the present discussion. For us, therefore, the brain is a piece of meat, which may be regarded from different points of view as an implementation of various different kinds of programs. As to which, if any, was intended to implement, all we can say is, God only knows. Let me take the issue of machine-state functionalism no further than this, and use what remaining time is available to consider causal role functionalism. As Saul says, one seldom finds any version of this doctrine spelled out in any detail, though Lewis takes things further than anyone else. Well, I would add a mention of Wolfgang Schwarz's recent discussion of Lewis and functionalism in the Blackwell Companion to David Lewis, which goes even further. With the excuse of time limits, I will consider here only the variety of this variety of causal role function, the variety that has been most thoroughly spelled out, this Ludovician view called analytic functionalism, as expounded by Schwarz. The underlying idea of the view is that we all implicitly subscribe to some kind of psychological theory. The theory is supposed to be about two kinds of things. On the one hand, there are external stimuli and external responses, presumably describable in terms of things in principle objectively observable by third parties. On the other hand, there are internal mental states. The theory consists of a lot of generalizations, typically guarded by words like typically, about various relations, typically various cause and effect relations, of internal mental states to external stimuli or to external responses, or to other internal mental states. Nothing, however, is said about the intrinsic nature of these internal mental states, but only about their causal, or as I said, functional relations to each other and to the external, objectively observable matters of stimulus and response. One of the mental states mentioned would presumably be that of being in pain. About this, it might be said, among other things, that cutting the body tends to cause one to come to be in this state, and that being in this state tends to cause a desire to get out of it, and so on. Here, cutting the body is an example of an external stimulus, while being in pain, producing desire of a certain kind, is an example of a causal relation of one internal state to another, though we've said nothing about the intrinsic nature of either. As the functionalist view is that subject X's being in pain at time t, for instance, just is a matter of two things being the case. First, that there is some unique collection of states that stand in the network of causal relations to each other and to stimuli and to responses that the psychological theory we implicitly subscribe to attributes to various internal mental states. So there are some states in the world of which the things said in this theory are true. And second, that at time t, the subject X we're interested in, is in that state in the collection which plays the role in the theory that the theory attributes to the state of being in pain. That's a mouthful, but that is the Ludovichian view. Subtle refinements of doctrine are needed to deal with, well, subtle refinements. Okay, I won't go into them. What I've said so far about analytic functionalism actually applies to both types of causal role theory, to Lewis's analytic functionalism and to Fodor's and Bloch's psychofunctionalism. Lewis's version contrasts with the others, and according to Lewis, the psychological theory involves no concepts not generally familiar to the lay public, and makes no assumptions not generally accepted by the lay public as something like platitudes. That is what Lewis means by saying that the theory belongs to folk psychology rather than to scientific psychology. Now, on this Ludovichian view, as Schwartz makes clear, folk psychology contains an analytic and a synthetic component. What is supposed to be synthetic is the assumption that there is indeed a unique system of states playing the various roles attributed by folk psychology to the various internal mental states with which it is concerned. What is supposed to be analytic is the conditional assertion that if there is indeed such a system of states, then the state of being in pain is, and the phrase being in pain refers to, the state in the collection that plays the role the theory attributes to the state it calls being in pain. Thus, the phrase being in pain means being in a state that plays the following role, followed by a specification of the role folk psychology attributes to being in pain. Saul says this sort of view, Saul correctly says, this point of view is utterly implausible in application to sensory states like being in pain. He compares trying to get a sensory state out of a functional role to trying to get water out of a stone. He does not elaborate considering the point familiar. He calls it the most popular objection to functionalism. But let me elaborate a little bit here as if on his behalf. So all right then, first notice that just as some people are born blind and are unable to see, and some people are born deaf and are unable to hear, so some people are born with a condition called congenital analgesia and are unable to feel pain. This is a dangerous condition, especially for children, as one can well imagine. One might even doubt whether anyone could survive with it past childhood. But it is said to be manifested by, well, a certain number of people, a cluster of people in one village in the far north of Sweden, and isolated cases elsewhere are sporadically reported. What does the occurrence of this condition have to do with our present concerns? Well, just this. The analytic of functionalist account of the meaning of being in pain seems plausible as an account of all that an individual who is incapable of feeling pain could mean by the phrase. Congenital analgesias, who do not react to being cut unless they happen to notice blood dripping, may say of pain, it's some internal state which people who are not like us, it's caused in them when they're cut, and it results in the kind of behavior we see in them when they are cut. Okay, but the analysis of functionalists of the meaning of being in pain offered us an analysis of an account of what ordinary people, in contrast to congenital analgesias mean by the phrase, is wholly and wildly implausible. Surely we mean a feeling with which we are acquainted from painful experience, and whose name we know by having been told it in childhood, long before we ever learned the whole of folk psychology, whatever that may be, while experiencing the state. the functionalist account leaves out the most important element in the meaning of being in pain, which we all learn when quite young, namely that it feels like this. No subtle argument of indirect Wittgensteinian inspiration concerned with issues in automata theory seems to be needed before we dismiss analytic functionalism as an account of what it means to speak of having a sensation such as pain. The use Saul sees for his argument in connection with analytic functionalism would be in the case of its account of internal mental states that, unlike sensations such as pain, introspection seems to show to be lacking in anything much in the way of so-called phenomenal character. Nowadays, many advocates, or professed advocates of analytic functionalism, tend to emphasize such examples rather than sensations. This is just to say that nowadays many people are really only partial advocates of analytic functionalism as an account plausible for a certain range of internal mental states, but not for others. This seems indeed to be the view of Schwartz, despite his general sympathy with Lewis. The types of mental states Saul mentions in these connections, his examples of states without much in the way of phenomenal character, are belief and meaning. Saul's main example of meaning, carried over from the Wittgenstein book, is meaning addition by plus and multiplication by times. Let me take as my main example of belief the belief that Donald Trump will not be the next president of the USA. I suppose this would do for an example of hope as well, and I'd have to distinguish what it is the hope that be from believe that be, but let me consider this capacity of believe that be. Now, certainly it cannot be unambiguously claimed that if there is something that it feels like to believe that Donald Trump will not be the next president of the USA. But there does seem to be something it feels like to be saying to oneself. That's an idiomatic expression, meaning thinking to oneself while not in fact saying out loud, that the Donald will not win the upcoming election. There must be something that's like to be Bill Clinton or to be Chris Christie, saying to himself, that clown is not going to be moving to the White House in January. Clinton surely will be saying this with glee, okay, to himself, and Christie likely with secret relief rather than more open glee and publicly professed disappointment. But despite the difference in the accompanying affect, there's something in common to their experiences and to the experiences of a neutral observer who says the same thing themselves. In jargon, I'm claiming that a current belief has a phenomenal character and so cannot be accounted for functionalistically, since an account of its functional relations will be leaving something out, how it feels to be in the state in question. But of course, not all belief is a current belief with a feeling to it. We may attribute to Hill or to Bill a belief that they will be moving back into the White House, even when she or he is deep in dreamless sleep and feeling nothing. Okay? This is a case of what is sometimes called dispositional belief, because in such a case, there generally is at least a disposition to have an occurrent belief when one is awake and the pertinent question is raised, even if there is no occurrent belief right this moment. I have said that a functionalist account, mentioning only causal relations among internal mental states and between them and external, objectively observable stimuli and responses, involving no mention of phenomenal character, never saying to be in such and such a state is like this, cannot be adequate as an account of a current belief. But there seems to be enough of a causal or functional relation between a current belief and dispositional belief that a theory that is inadequate as an account of the former must ipso facto be inadequate as an account of the latter. Let me say that again. I've argued that because there's something that feels like to have a current belief, a functionalist account can't be adequate of that. It can never be adequate of it as an account of something with a phenomenal feel to it. But since there is a causal functional relation between dispositional belief and a current belief, an account that is inadequate as an account of current belief can't be adequate as an account of dispositional belief either. Okay. A crucial part of its characterization of the internal mental state it calls dispositional belief will be that it has certain functional relations to another internal mental state that it calls a current belief. But the account of the latter will be inadequate by leaving out its phenomenal character, and this will make the account of the former inadequate too. Saul in his book argues for introspection that meaning does not itself have a phenomenal character. There's nothing that it's distinctively introspectable that it feels like to mean plus by plus. He does seem to allow, however, that it has some relation to internal states that do have a phenomenal character. At any rate, that's what I would claim. For instance, it's surely a part of folk psychology that when people are shouted at in a language whose meaning they do not know, they tend to become distressed in one way or another. Here is a connection between meaning, the state that I'm granting does not itself have a phenomenal character, and distress, an affectual or emotional state that most assuredly does have one. But if there is such a connection, then an account solely in terms of external stimuli and external responses, plus causal or functional relations, with no mention of phenomenal character, can't be any more adequate for meaning than for distress. Or anyhow, that is my thought. Saul emphasizes that functionalism is supposed to be a holistic view, according to which one gives an account of any one internal mental state by and only by giving an account of every other internal mental state as well. Saul cites this holism as another implausible feature of the view. Again, Saul correctly cites this holism as another implausible feature of the view. But what is important for me at this point is that holism implies that, on their own showing, if a functionalist accounts are unsatisfactory as accounts of one class of internal mental states, those with an introspectable phenomenal character, then they must be unsatisfactory as accounts of all internal mental states, including such as are not introspectable. Nevertheless, the Kripkean anti-functionalist considerations I described earlier in application of machine state functionalism are supposed to be applicable to analytic functionalism as well, and for that matter to psychofunctionalism, which I'm not discussing here. These considerations are supposed to provide an extra, additional argument to the one that I've been sketching, and to others there may be expounded in the literature against analytic functionalist accounts of belief or meaning. Presumably, analytic functionalism must have some points of similarity with machine state functionalism, else why call them both functionalism? According to Saul, they have enough points of similarity that his refutation of machine state functionalism should carry over, mutatis mutandis, to analytic functionalism. This is the part where I myself do not see how the adaptation from the one case to the other is supposed to happen. I expect to do it, we'd have to get into intricacies and subtleties about Lewis's position that I have passed over and will continue to pass over. So I must just say, I won't attempt to explain how the kind of critique that was given for machine state functionalism is supposed to apply to analytic functionalism. I begged off doing this when I was writing my book, Saul, Kripke, Puzzles and Mysteries, and I'll beg off doing it again today, and leave the matter perhaps for Saul to comment on. Along with that topic, I will leave aside any extended discussion of possible responses on Lewis's behalf. A Ludovichian would say that what makes multiplication refer to multiplication is that multiplication is the most natural total function that is approximated by the partial function whose values we give when we engage in what we call multiplication. This naturalness is not supposed to be a matter of simplicity by some human measure of simplicity. That's one of several topics Saul discusses in his paper that I haven't gone into. It is not human measures, but the inhuman universe, ultimate reality as it is in itself, independent of and indifferent to us and our concerns, that has certain distinctions built into it, distinctions that for want of a better term we call natural. The Ludovichian view is that ultimate reality is like a crystal with certain inherent planes of potential cleavage. Our feeble tapping along a small portion of the surface of this crystal, though it can never trace a distinction across its whole infinite extent, or even trace one over a small finite portion in a completely reliably reproducible way, nonetheless is like the tapping of a diamond cutter's hammer, sufficient to make the crystal split according to one of its natural planes of cleavage. The distinction the cleavage marks thereby becomes the one that we may be said to have been marking with our tapping, and provides the criterion of rightness for wrongness for any further taps. No facts purely about us determines rightness or wrongness here, but certain facts about us, together with certain facts about ultimate reality independent of us. As for my opinion, I consider this a metaphysical folly or fantasy, hardly deserving a response beyond an incredulous stare, and I'll be rather surprised if Saul does not feel similarly. But I've already gone on for too long and must therefore leave further explorations of such issues to Saul and in subsequent discussion, and close here with thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Saul.
Okay, now
It's your turn.
well, okay, now I will say this has been such a brilliant summary and development of my views that I felt little to say in addition. I will make a few remarks that are not even wasn't based on anything written out, but just a summary of a few thoughts I have had on this. I do not know whether I will take all the allotted time given to me to respond, but who knows? One can take either more than or less than one expects. Now, I will say that this problem about idealization and malfunctioning and so on, it did not come up in discussion of functionalism in reaction to my Wittgenstein book, but it did come up in reaction to what I say in my Wittgenstein book about dispositionalism, that is, that to mean times or plus or whatever, I simply have to be properly disposed to give the sum or the product, right? And, I said, of course, we do have dispositions to make mistakes, and we do have, and we cannot say, given our very finite storage capacity, what would happen if we were able to live forever and our brains were expanded, and so on. These are silly speculations. About this, I have gotten the response in print and everything that this ignores the role of idealization in science, that the ideal gas theory or whatever would also be ruled out if my remarks were taken seriously, and so on. Right now, about this, I would say two things, or maybe more than two, but I will just have a couple things to say. First, that Jerry Folder wrote about me in this book. Well, first, who is to say what is the appropriate idealization here? I think it is really being specified circularly by a presumption that my true ideal disposition is to give the products rather than the product or something, right? So, and this seems to me to be blatantly circular. It's presupposing the very thing that it's trying to account for. Second, that if an actual empirical theory will be desired, well, we can't really give one about if our brains were expanded and so on. We could give one about dispositions to make mistakes and so on. And indeed, as Martin Kusch, who has written a commentary on my Wittgenstein book, explains in this very case of the ideal gas law, then physicists trying to get rid of such idealization do take into account various things like interactions between the molecules and so on and so forth, and get what they consider to be a more exact theory. But we don't want a more exact theory to attribute to us some other function in which we are not malfunctioning, right? And this is really some confusion of as if we were designed to do this, right? And so on, when the people who say this certainly do not wish to be willing to appeal to such a designer. Now, I have not read Wolfgang Schwartz. I thought maybe of trying to get hold of him in connection since he's been brought up in this paper, but I decided to stick to reading David Lewis himself.
Well, that's not true. We couldn't get the book.
Oh, did we try it?
Yes. it wasn't in the library. And, yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, we could have ordered the book, I was what I said, but we didn't, because so I don't know what Wolfgang Schwartz has to say, and apparently he tries to make the thing a bit more plausible than David Lewis originally did. Nevertheless, I have some comments and remarks on Lewis himself. So, there are really a few papers that are relevant. The original paper is an argument for the identity theory, and which he doesn't use the term functionalism in that paper itself, but in the preface he expresses that this is a form of functionalism, though then he has some footnote with some reservations to what most people say is. Now, I wish, since I will be rather critical, and a lot of what David says has to be met with, one says, Hume says, we can mix up and so on, right? Does get an incredulous there. But one must commend his general brilliance. Also, something I like, though not plausibly implied here, is that he does not dismiss folk psychology as just some pre-scientific view, but in fact makes it important for his own notions. Now, whether he does this in a plausible way is another question. Now, his idea is, as John aptly summarized it, is that all mental states, all experiences, as a term he used, are defined by their causal role in an entire network of causal relations given to us by folk psychology. Okay, right. Well, you see why this is how he says it's a finite thing, but it would be, in fact, if you were really taking this idea seriously and assuming that there is such a set of relations, right? A huge book, which he states will be finite in length, but I don't think I have ever read it, right? It would be enormous. Now, John, in his extension, David gets things even worse where one has a connection with the entire universe and so on. That probably was not something that David Lewis thought of. Now, here, let me have a quote or two from David Lewis. Now, so the first premise, he calls this an argument for the identity theory, right? The first premise is the principle, the definitive characteristic of my experience as such is its causal role. The definitive causal role of an experience is expressed by a finite set of conditions that specifies typical causes and typical effects under various circumstances. By analytic necessity, these conditions are true of the experience and jointly distinctive of it. Now, my first premise, he says, is an elaboration and generalization of Smart's theory that the vowels of experience are in effect of the form, what is going on in me is like what is going on in me when, right? Okay, right? And specified by specification of typical stimuli for responses to the experiences. Now, Smart's formulation wouldn't have this globality problem if one believed that his formulation is, I have a pain, is not translatable as what is going on in me is like what goes on when a pin is stuck into me. Because the concept of pain might be introduced without mention of pins. Right, it could, right. But the objection is no good against the translation. What is going on in me is like what goes on when and because my skin is damaged. This is supposed to be, I don't know. Does one really mean that the concept of pain cannot be introduced, though it can be introduced without mention of pin? One must mention skin and damage to the skin. Indeed, the congenital analgesics can see it best that way, but I don't see why the objection still isn't good. I don't know what always goes on when my skin is damaged. I don't have to have heard about damage to the skin to have the concept of pain. These things seem to me to be pretty obvious. Now, the holistic objection would not apply to this particular example because it's supposed to be so simple. But he recognizes that that's not typical. He says that he does give a causal role to experiences, and the principles that experiences are defined by the causal roles is itself behavioristic in origin. It inherits the behaviorist discovery that the ostensible causal connection between the experience and its typical occasions and manifestation sometimes contain a component of analytic necessity. But his principle improves on the original behavioristic embodiment of that discovery in several ways. It allows experiences to be real, they have causal connections with each other, and so on, right? Now, he actually states that behaviorism is widely accepted. I don't know what was the atmosphere.
What year is he saying?
Yes, you see. Now, when was this paper written? I actually looked it up in that connection between that.
70-something.
70-something. I don't know.
So what was the original paper?
Yeah, the original paper is document 66.
66.
Was that
The behaviors was a little overripe then.
yeah.
So, I can remember still visiting a laboratory. I think it was actually in Israel in 1980, where they were still doing experiments with rats, and they have just moved on from doing kind of behaviors experiments with rats to actually being interested in what rats do out in the fields, with a view eventually to applications of reducing the number of them out in grain fields.
I don't know.
But the cognitive stuff was coming in. I can't remember the date that the paper, Behavior and Brain Science, that journal was founded.
Yeah.
So that was a landmark of admitting that the brain is not an organ for cooling the blood, and that everything inside the skin is not a black box, and so forth. But the older attitude really persisted for, I would say, right through the 50s. When Skinner published the book that Chomsky demolished, that was like in 58 or something, right? Yeah. So he was still a very prominent person then.
Oh, yeah, he was certainly prominent. And I suppose, like, through Quine and so on, right? Yeah. His influence would be, I don't know whether David was also thinking of Ryle. Okay, yeah. Now, in the event, his view that, experiences, let's forget that the phenomenal quality of them is plainly left out. I do think that the emanation that damaged the skin is sufficient for pain, even if one is not interested in the qualitative field objection, right, is not. I don't know why he came to think that was clearly a way that pain had to be introduced to us, right? You know, these analgesics you talked about, they're most likely to see that because it's external, but they could notice people, groaning and so on, without any damage to the skin, nor is there necessarily, or even generally, I don't know what's true, pain when there is damage to the skin. So I do not know what was going on in David's mind here. Now, any rate, the network that he calls folk psychology would, if it exists, be an enormous book that none of us have ever read or learned, yet it's supposed to be involved, not in this example, which if it were right, we would avoid it, right? But it's supposed to be usually involved in any mental state description, yet I doubt that any of us would understand any mental state description if it involved such a book. Now, that's assuming the existence of such a book. The truth is that I think that there is no one folk psychology that will assign the same sort of relations and experiences and so on to all of us. Like there's some sensation I get myself sometimes. It's in the back of my head. I do not know else what to say about it. I don't know whether anyone else has it. I don't know. I mean, really on that, right? It is vaguely associated in my mind with my being tired. If I concentrate on feeling tired, I'm more likely to notice it. But probably each person would have his or her own book, right? And would also have to learn another book about every other person. So this all does deserve an incredulous stare now. John, with his the stuff about the relation to the universe and so on makes the matter even worse, right?
Yeah, that comes more from his paper on Putnam's paradox, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Directly to stuff on functionalism.
Yeah. Okay. So, I guess I thought I'd bring 2 David Lewis collections, but I brought only one. I don't even know which. This is the worst. This is the one he didn't like simply because of the bad print.
He doesn't use a comparison to a diamond cutter. He's more like a comparison to a butcher. We cut at the natural joints. So the universe is supposed to have these natural joints in it. So we hack a little bit, and the thing comes apart if we hit near a natural joint. And the natural joint is what we need.
Okay, now, now he has another relevant paper. He has another relevant paper here: Mad Pain and Martian Pain. Mad pain is supposed to be pain that doesn't. Well, the case that he imagines is hard for me to imagine that is even empirically realizable. Someone who enjoys the same, I guess, physical state that has a functional role in us. But I guess, John, you report that you have not been distressed by pain.
I once had the experience in my misspent youth of the effects of, yes, the drug, one of whose effects is that if you, for instance, happen to hit your elbow against the wall or something, as I happen to do, you will feel some sensation in your arm that's not at all, it's not either pleasant or unpleasant, it's just there. And after a few seconds, you may recognize, oh, that's pain. It's pain. You're feeling the pain and it's not bothered by it. Now, my wife claims that after both our children were born, they were both born by cesarean, that one of the anesthetics she was given afterwards also had this effect, that you still felt the sensation there, which you recognized as a sensation of pain, but you weren't bothered by it. See, most analgesics work by blocking the sensation, but it's also possible to block something from the sensory things to the center that has where the affect that usually accompanies the sensation is concerned. I cite this elsewhere as an example of how it's difficult just by armchair reflection even to know what pain involves. Even to think that, if you think pain causes wincing or something, well, there are these cases, and it seems that everyone who's had this experience describes it as feeling pain and not being bothered by it. So there's systematically cases where there is pain without any wincing being caused by it. So it's really the suffering that normally accompanies pain is what causes the wincing, if anything does. So that, and there are also all sorts of other dissociations that most people haven't experienced, and you can't really think, you can't really imagine what it's like to have one of those, to be in one of those states, and therefore you can't apply the usual methodology of trying to figure out whether a word would be appropriately applied in such and such circumstances, which is imagining those circumstances and doing it. For most things, if you want to know whether the word would be appropriately applied, in such and such a case, you don't actually have to put yourself in those circumstances. You can just imagine them. But when they involve some kind of sensory thing, if you haven't had the experience, you're very unlikely to be able to imagine it, and therefore to make the correct judgment on these things.
Yeah. Okay, and so this gets me to another part of Lewis. Look, so he has this there mad pain. Okay, there. Now, I take it anyway that mad pain is still pain because it's the same material state, though not functionally the same. Martian pain, however, is a different material state, but has the same functional role. And he allows both, but not the combination of the two, right? Well, you can see what the plausibility of that is. I will say in the remarks on smart formulation that I quoted, I didn't even ask, okay, what is going on in me is like, what's going on, like in what respects, you say, right? There are various respects. And affect, material state, or qualitative state, which I think is what someone would really have in mind, but you're not supposed to study that, right? Are all involved. Now, anyway, look, here is our David Lewis's remarks on the friends of qualia in appendix to the mad pain and Martian pain. Now, you have not tasted. Now, here it is, the argument, where he refers, of course, to Frank Jackson and to Thomas Nagel's What Is It Like to Be a Vet, and so on, right? And so, isn't there something that we don't know what it's like, right, to taste Vegemite? Are people familiar with that? I am not. Yeah, a celebrated yeast-based condiment. So you do not know what it's like to taste Vegemite, and you never will unless you taste Vegemite, or unless the same experience or counterfeit traces of it are somehow produced in you by artificial means. No amount of the information where it's of materials and functional speech will help you at all. Before that, he has said, oh, of course I know what it's like to be in pain, or what it is. It's to have such and such a causal role. But now he admits that there might be some further problem here, right? So he replies, right? So you obtain the type of information the materials and functionalists overlook entirely, called phenomenal information. By mean qualia, I mean the subject matter of this phenomenal information. Now, he said we must eliminate, if that is, deny that this is a kind of information. Nor can we claim lessons in physics, physiology, and so on could teach the inexperienced what it's like to take Vegemite. Our proper answer, I think, is knowing that it's like is not the possession of information at all. It's doesn't eliminate, it's a possession. It's simply an ability, right? And knowing how abilities to recognize abilities, to imagine abilities, to predict one's behavior by means of imaginative experience. And he refers to Lawrence Nemerow, who, I have not read him, but this is presumably a reasonable summary. Look, in reply to that kind of view, I wish to refer both to Adriana's discussion in a previous session, right? I think there are plain pieces of propositional knowledge that are involved. I think I mentioned some of them, right? And some even when I could hear, I didn't know them until I was told, right? Or read it, right? But also, now, John's remarks just before, right, where various of our more complex like attitudes really have a qualitative character too, and we don't really understand what's about them unless we really understand the qualitative and introspectable character. And I think both of these are rather telling points against the sort of reply. I take it that Wolfgang Schwartz retreats on this issue, right? Is that right?
He does retreat. I don't remember exactly what, how far he retreats before drawing the curtain, but...
Okay. So I have probably said enough, I suppose. Okay. Okay. And, yeah. Lewis should be given the credit for spelling out and sort of analytic and cultural functionalism better than anyone else did. But by doing it, he really showed what an extraordinary and plausible view it would have to be. Okay.
Well, I don't know whether we have questions from the audience. You, Adriana?
Yes, I have.
Yeah?
It's possible. There are other people listening?
No.
Okay.
Go ahead.
You mentioned the role of introspection and how functionalist people think about introspection in terms of being a causal process, let's say. One question is if you could elaborate more on that problem or on that issue, and the other thing is what is your position on that view of introspection as a causal growth process, but not for our pains or qualitative states, but for introspection of, let's say, certain attitudes or thoughts, beliefs, or other mental states that don't have, or controversial, don't have qualitative character. So you. I am thinking just in, for example, in someone like Armstrong, who has a functionalist view of introspection in terms of saying that introspection operates causally, but he not only applies he not only thinks that introspection is of our, let's say, of our qualitative states is a causal process, but also introspection of other mental states, such as beliefs, for example, works functionally. So if you could elaborate on those things, if possible.
Okay, I don't know quite what to say to that. I don't remember Armstrong. I thought Armstrong was someone who believes in the identity, the identity theory. Yeah, so for him, introspecting will just be some physical thing going on in the brain. Now, the difficulty with those kind of view is that what thing going on in the brain it is would seem to have to be an a posteriori discovery. Yeah. That's in contrast to the Lewis thing, where it's supposed to ultimately be analytic. Yeah. And for you to have the a posteriori discovery, you have to be able to check. Well, when I'm having this kind of introspective experience, what's going on in my brain and so forth. You have to be able to know when you're having the experience in order to check against what the physical conditions going on are at that time. Yes. So you have to have a way of recognizing that it being in that state. Yes. That doesn't depend on you're having identified it already with the physical state. But that can only be by the states having some features that are not included in the physical description of the state. And so the whole literature on physicalism in this is how ultimately do you deny this? Yeah. How ultimately do you deny this? And the way it's done is by adopting revisionary metaphysics, I call it. So you depart from the notion of fact, say, that's implicit in our ordinary talk of facts. I'll change the example, if I may. Some years ago, I had a strange experience. It looked like there was water pouring down the walls of the room where I was. And I really believed that there was water pouring down, partly because there had been plumbing problems before. And I touched it, it was completely dry. And this was a little, it went away after about 20 minutes. It was a little disconcerting. I did not actually go to a doctor to consult about it, but I happened to see doctors a lot, and none of them could tell me anything until I mentioned it to my optometrist and our ophthalmologist, and he asked me just a couple more questions. Just, oh, that's an ocular migraine. So now I knew that I had an ocular migraine. I still have no idea what's going on in the brain of this.
Yeah.
So my doctor, Dr. Liu, can say, you know, JD knows that he's had an ocular migraine. He doesn't know that this such and such went on in his brain. Ordinary language immediately allows you to expand that to saying, JD is aware of the fact that he has had an optical migraine. He's not aware of the fact that such and such went on in his brain. But if the fact that I had an optical migraine is something in which I'm aware, and the fact that such and such was going on in the brain is something in which I'm not aware, those must be distinct facts.
Yeah.
Now, if you doubt it here to descriptiveness, that is just making explicit what's implicit in our own way of talking things, and allow yourself to legislate and stipulate, well then of course you can stipulate, no, facts are coarse-grained, and the fact that I have an optical migraine is the same as the fact that I have, just because facts are coarse-grained, or maybe they're sparse and there aren't even going to, you know, there isn't any such fact at all that what it feels like to be in this state. In non-descriptive and revisionary metaphysics, there are no rules. At least the reason I never participated in the activity is that I have never been able to discern the rules, and it's always looked to me like the players were making them up as they went along. In the absence of any rules, if you're not pinned down to trying to derive your metaphysical categories from things that are there already in our ordinary ways of thinking, then of course you can say anything. And the question is, well, how much is it worth to say all properties are physical properties if you get that result only by constantly legislating? Well, the notion of property must be taken to be very coarse-grained. The notion of fact must be taken to be very coarse-grained. All these other notions must all be taken to be very coarse-grained. Because the fact is going to remain. There are real issues out there. The real issues are, the one that's recently been debated is whether fish feel pain. So they're real organisms swimming around out there, and they either are or they aren't suffering, you know. And that won't go away. That kind of thing can't be made to go away just by legislating on the facts. So there's a sense in which the whole issue about is there a new fact being experienced or not is not as important. It's not as important as these other issues because it seems to be decided. You know, your one decision if you adhere to descriptive metaphysics, if you can get any other descriptor you want if you're willing to go in for revisionary metaphysics, and that's basically what's done.
Okay, I have a question for you,
and for both of you, because of course, I mean, there's a phenomenal character of experiences like pain and some other. But you talked about a qualitative character of propositional attitudes like recurrent beliefs, for example. And I think, I mean, there is a big difference. Of course, I mean, they could be something accompanying an recurrent belief, I don't know, fear or something like a surprise or whatever. But that is not definitory of the mental state. I mean, the mental state of having an recurrent belief is not. No, it's not. It's not characterized by its having a quality as.
I spoke too quickly, but what I intended to say, the reason I cited both Bill Clinton and Chris Christie is that they would have different affects while they were saying to themselves, Trump is going to lose the election. But they nonetheless, there's something that would be common to their experience, the experience of saying to yourself.
I don't know whether there's an experience of saying to yourself. I mean, of course, we have a mental life in a way, yes, but having an experience of saying to yourself, sometimes you say to yourself, I forgot my drops of gas, for example, but I don't know whether, I mean, that is not essential to the mental state I'm in. Whereas it is essential to my pain to feel in a certain way, to have a certain qualitative. I mean, I think we shouldn't think that all mental states have something of a qualitative part. Or
well, of course not all mental states.
No, not all.
No, there are certainly many
not all.
unconscious mental states.
And when you read a book, when you talk with some other person.
But I was talking about a current belief, that is, thinking to yourself, such and such. There really is something that it's like to be thinking to yourself, such and such. That it's I know people may attribute to you a belief that such and such at a time when you're not having this experience. There certainly is something that's like to be thinking. Just look through a written thing, and when you notice a typo, say, you just think that's a misprint there, and you just have the thought that's a misprint.
Yes, but is that thought which contains the qualitative character, the phenomenal character, or is it like a posterior thought about that?
Well, I don't, probably everyone may be different. To me, it's not like having an auditory hallucination, but it's related to auditory experience, the way someone who can visualize an object would be related to visual experience.
Well, some people do talk of some vocalizations here. I think, yes, right, this is not so much a qualitative character as some of the other things that John cites, like how you feel when someone's shouting to you in a foreign language or something, is more like a qualitative thing, but still, there is that, as in the psalmist who says the fool has said in his heart, right? There is no God. That's like already a primitive idea of this some localization, I guess, right. It's in two songs which are more or less identical, right?
I have another question for you. You talked about holism as and John also, as an objection to functionalism.
Well, David Lewis.
Well, David Lewis is
especially, right?
Okay. How is it connected with the fact that holism depends on our mental states having a certain propositional content, I think, and or not.
Well, that would
be
a part of it, but at least according to David Lewis, all experiences are definable by their causal roles, interacting with other experiences and so on, right? This will apply both to more complex things like propositional attitudes and also, right, things like being like, look, originally it says, you haven't said what it's like to be in pain. Sure I have. It's related to this and related to that. And so that's actually in David Lewis's writings, right? But later in an appendix, which I quoted, he talks about what the friends of Qualia will say that you haven't really said, right? And tries to give this reply, which maybe it did convince a few people, I don't know, right? He mentions this other guy who gives this more elaborately, and I have not read him. Right. But I think the reply is quite convincing. I don't know whether, Frank Jackson, of course, eventually retracted. I don't know if this was on the basis of accepting this reply or what, actually. Right. Of course, his form of it was epiphenomenal and not fact is not very plausible form, right? Of what's going on, right?
Oh, there's another question.
This is leading us slightly away from, but since there seems to be a number of us anti-materialists here and a couple at the podium, is it relevant to talk about which kind of anti-materialism we favour? About, for example, qualia. So we're rejecting Lewis's view that by the familiar causal closure arguments, one is supposed to accept either epiphenomenalism or or something else maybe? Or is that taking us too far away from functionalism?
Yeah, well, you've just written a book on what you
Yes, I've written a book about what I think. I don't use the word qualia. In fact, I'm suspicious because when you replace ordinary talk about sensation or something with this technical talk, it opens the door for then introducing dissuasive definitions of this is a trick that Dennett plays. This is a trick that Dennett plays. Replaces the talk of sensation with talk of qualia, then defines qualia so that it's some impossible combination of properties. So that kind of philosophical hocus pocus, in order to avoid it, I don't use that kind of terminology. In terms of the traditional categories, my actual belief is closest to epiphenomenalism, but with the following qualification, that I am not at all convinced that the notion of cause is one that it's really appropriate to use outside the realm of everyday practical affairs. Whether there really is, I'm sympathetic to Russell when he said it's Stone Age metaphysics, and the repair that was written, what's the name of the guy who wrote the repair? Who wrote the reply to Russell? His name slips me now, and says, well, of course, there isn't really any such thing, just as there's not really any such thing as caloric fluid, but there are many circumstances in which it's useful to pretend there is, so that there are many circumstances in which it's useful to pretend there is such a thing as causation. So, modulo the fact that I don't really, have doubts about the application of the notion of causation, which are very similar, outside of everyday affairs. If I had to adopt an uncritical attitude towards causation, I would then lean towards epiphenomenalism. Not that I'm not aware of some of the reasons why people. There are some reasons that people don't like it that seem to be silly, but there are others that do not seem to be silly.
And what about you, Saul?
I do not so much have a worked out view. It is probably pretty more materialist, yes. But, gosh, I don't get attracted, even though I know some reasons for it, to trying to eliminate the notion of cause, or that our subjective experiences have no causal role. So I don't think either of these now. That puts me out really outside some sort of ideology of the present day, right? Among most philosophers who even think science has shown that this and that, when science has shown no such thing, right? It is, David Lewis says the exact opposite, that scientists say that they have not shown this is either defeative or philosophy. I think it's the reverse, though, of course. There have been tremendous successes about, relating our experiences and our actions, right, to neural things and so on, that science has really established that this is it. Seems to me not particularly to be the case. Yes, I guess I quoted Stephen Weinberg in your talk. We don't have a final theory, right? And we probably don't even in this domain, right?
We won't have any.
Well, for a while, I'm certainly a very important physicist. Actually, I think the two physicists that one said, that what is deluded physicists in thinking that this was ever written, right? Into thinking that they've got everything like 19th century physics and things like that. This is the 20s. It is not just that some views are refuted, that they don't know what can be explained, right? And we do not have something that will explain consciousness, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and yeah. And that's what I thought, and whether it will be considered if we do get some sort of more grasp of this part of physics or something else, like science, certainly, right? That is yet to be
To wait for.
yet to be waited for, and will not be achieved very quickly. Right?